with lighter weights and then begin to add heavier weight. You want to do a lot of exercises, not just a few, to engage all of the body's major muscle groups. Between 8 and 18 separate exercises. Now, when we're trained athletes, we tend to focus on particular muscle groups because we want that guy to be a good linebacker in football, or we want him to hit home runs in baseball. And so there are certain muscle groups we tend to emphasize over others, but that's because we're paying him a lot of money or we're giving him a scholarship or something like that. He's got a very specific task. But for most of us who are just wanting to be strong enough to avoid disease and to be strong enough to chase our kids and do our jobs, for health, you need to do a lot more stations. And I have a program at JSC where I have 18 stations and the people are expected to go through it in 30 minutes. So you choose a large range of repetitions. For people who are trying to build a lot of strength with a few stations, they can have very heavy weight and only do 3 to 5 reps. I mean, that's very heavy weight. By the way, the heavier the weight, the fewer the repetitions. I think that's kind of common sense. And if you have light weight, you do higher repetitions. Also, for most of us, in just normal life, endurance is going to trump strength. I mean, that's the kind of work we do in our garage, in our yards, in our jobs, and so forth. We don't need huge strength to beat up the guy across the football line from us because we're not doing that kind of thing anymore. We're just working in our garage and yards and those kinds of things. And so I generally recommend going through endurance training above strength training. You want to exercise all the major muscle groups at least 2 days a week. Now, we found a huge difference in increase in strength for those who exercise 1 day a week as compared to none. And those who lift weights 1 day compared to none. And those who exercise twice a week get almost twice the value as compared to only 1 day a week. But the difference between 3 and 2 days a week is very small. We do see the optimum gain in strength for people who lift weights or do resistance training 3 days a week with the rest day in between, alternating days. But the difference in 3 compared to 2 isn't big. Now, that's kind of good news for most of us who have a job and a family and other things to do, meaning you get about the same thing for 2 days a week as compared to 3, and that's usually what I advise for our employees. Lift weights or do strength training twice a week and do aerobic training 3 to 5 days a week. Be sure all of them are done to proper form. By the way, if you use a standard exercise room, there's instructions pasted to the side of every machine. Follow those instructions. They're there for a reason. And if you don't really know if you're using free weights and stuff, take the time to get a technician or a trainer to make sure you don't drop the thing and hurt yourself. You want to allow enough time between lifts so that you can exercise at the proper form. Don't try to exercise when you're totally fatigued, but you don't want to take too much time. Just enough time to give you enough rest to go from one station to the next. Healthy people can exercise all the way to exhaustion. So if they're doing 10 repetitions, then the 9th and the 10th one are so heavy that they can't do 11. Understand? That's it. They can't do 11. But for people who have risk, those who have heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and so forth, they don't go to total exhaustion. We're worried about their blood pressure. We just tell them to go until the lift becomes more difficult or when the contraction slows down. So then they go 7, 8, 9, and they're finished. They don't have to go to total exhaustion, just until it slows down. Also, don't hold your breath. There's a little flap in your trachea called a glottis, and there's a tendency when people lift weights, they strain and they close that glottis. They try to lift the weight, heavy weight, and when you do that, they shut off blood flow through the carotid arteries to the brain, and they raise the blood pressure in an inordinate way, and that can be very dangerous. Some people literally lost consciousness with heavy weights overhead and dropped it on their throat. That is not cool at all. So what we tell folks is that you're supposed to exhale during the lift and inhale as you lower the weight. So what I tell people simply is be sure you breathe when you lift weights. Keep records of your progress. That's just good advice for weight loss programs. Same thing for strength programs. And vary the program. In other words, cross-train. Do something different every now and then. Now, here's some training principles. And I'll go through these fairly fast. The first one is really pretty simple, and that's overload. It just means you're supposed to lift to train something that's a little heavier than what you'd normally lift. And it depends on whether you're going to improve absolute strength or endurance. If you're going for strength, you want the weight to be at least 2/3 of what we call the 1 repetition max. 2/3 of the most weight you can lift one time, one repetition max. And I'm going to say a little bit more about the one repetition max in just a minute. If you're going for endurance, you can lift something a lot lighter. 30%, I mean, really light. You just have to lift it a lot of times. And then you can manipulate this overload many ways by changing the resistance, adding more weight or more resistance, adding the repetitions, doing multiple sets, all kinds of ways, just as long as it gradually increases and it raises the overload. First question I get from anybody who comes into a strength training program is, hey, how much weight do I put on that thing? And there's a lot of, and especially for newcomers, there's a lot of fancy looking equipment in every exercise room, and sometimes that can be a little scary. So what I do is I do 2 tests to determine their upper body 1 repetition max and the lower body 1 repetition max. And then I estimate or calculate the 1 repetition max for all of the equipment they're going to use. And I've got some formulas that I developed myself, but I've been doing this for a long time for thousands of people, and I'd be happy to share them with you if you'd like to know what they are. But there's some pretty simple tests. I do for the upper body, I do a kind of a bench press, which is a seated chest press, and lower body, I do a leg extension test, and then I calculate what weight the 1 repetition max is for all the rest of the machines. And then if they're beginners, I multiply 0.60, that's 60% of 1 repetition max. That's the amount of weight they're going to use if they're beginners on each machine. If they're accustomed to doing it, they're regular exercisers, then it's 70%. For most high school and college athletes playing football and so forth, we start them at 80% of 1 repetition max. So it all depends on where you are. Now, for people who don't have access to taking a test, it's still pretty simple. And people are very good at estimating how much weight they can lift. What you do is you take them over to the machine or the barbell or whatever it is, and you say, look at that thing. How much weight do you think you could lift between 8 and 12 times? Let's say it's a bench press. People are very good at estimating. They'll say, I think I can do about 100 pounds. You'd be surprised how close they get. And then say, all right, get down there and try it. And if they can lift it at least 8 times and not more than 12 times, they've got it. That's about the much weight they're supposed to be using. That's around 70 to 75% of the 1 repetition max, which means that generally speaking, that's what we call a 10 repetition max lift. So they lift it roughly 10 times. And then you adjust by trial and error. And by the way, you adjust with the upper body 5 pounds. That's the, arms, arm curl, press, and so forth. And lower body 10 pounds. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, a good question people always ask me is, what should I use, single sets or multiple sets? Now, if you don't understand the difference, for people who lift weights with sets, a real common example is, let's say you're doing a 10 repetition max, 3 sets. So let's say you've got 100 pounds on a bench press. This is just theoretical. 100 pounds. The guy gets down there, he lifts it 10 times. And on the 9th, 10th, he's really straining. He gets up and rests about 30 seconds. He gets back down, lifts the same amount of weight as many times as he can. The second time, maybe it goes 9 times because he's getting tired. That's the second set. Then he rests for 30 seconds. Then his third set does the same amount of weight. Maybe it's 8 times. So he's getting kind of tired. They have seen lots of growth in muscle size using these multiple set programs. But comparative programs show very similar results, meaning that they just do more stations. The guy may do a bench press, then a pec fly, for his chest, and there's an incline press and all kinds of other programs. So they do more programs. As long as they go to exhaustion on every single lift with little rest, they don't see much difference in the outcome in terms of improvement in strength, hypertrophy of the muscle, or increasing the size of the muscle, the single set compared to the multi-set program. But multi-set programs are very popular among bodybuilders and powerlifters, and they will go blind in the face if you tell them they can get the same thing with single set programs, because they will really think you're stupid. So you can let them you can get huge value in both. It's kind of a matter of preference. The difference is, for single set programs, they tend to work better for our normal employees who you're just training for health. You can give them a whole lot more exercises, so more stations, meaning you can engage more muscle groups. They tend to be more efficient, and they get over faster, and they tend to have a better compliance record. People stick with them a little better. They don't get tired, worn out, and quit as fast. Now, progression. No program's any good if you don't get better and continue getting better. continue to increase. You can expect muscle strength to increase, at least at first, around 3% a week. I mean, people can really get stronger and stronger faster if they can gradually overload, gradually progress. So you raise the load when the lift starts to get easy. So if you start out with 100 pounds, 8 to 12 reps, and then you get up so that now you start out, you can only lift it 8 times, and after the weeks pass, now you're lifting it 10 times, 12 times, maybe 13 times. Usually that takes around a month, roughly. Now you're ready to add weight, ready to progress. Add 5 pounds for upper body and 10 pounds for lower body. Gradually increase that. And you can adjust it, the progression, many ways by adjusting the number of sets, the number of repetitions, how long you spend between rest between lifts, how many days a week, all these kinds of things. All right, specificity, very important. I really like this slide. You look at the guy right there in the middle. He's pulling a resistance band on a bar because he's trying to go from a base hitter to a power hitter. He's trying to improve something very specific in baseball. Notice the one beside it is weight training for football. It's different for weight training for baseball. And the guy on the other end is just a bodybuilder. He wants to look cool on the beach. I mean, it's just all different kinds of programs, lots of choices. It's not just weightlifting. But if you have specific goals like that baseball player, you want to make sure you train not only those very important muscles that are involved in hitting a baseball, you want to try to train them in the same motion. You want to follow that same movement pattern. He's trying to swing that, like that, very similar to as if he's hitting a baseball. So all the results are going to be very specific to the activity that you do, very specific to the movement that you follow, the muscle fibers that are engaged, the metabolic pathways that are, whether it's anaerobic or aerobic, your support system. In other words, if this guy's standing there swinging the bat, his legs are getting trained too because he's standing on his legs. That's his support system. For general fitness, we tell people to exercise all the major muscle groups in a very specific way that they're going to be living. So if you're going to be accustomed to walking, you want to be training walking and running programs, for example. That's kind of a good example. All right. Lots of options. It doesn't really matter whether you use free weights, machines, or there's the picture there on the right. The guy's carrying big, heavy rocks, or a live animal. It doesn't matter as long as it's progressively increases in weight. You're going to progressively increase in strength. So the mode really depends on what your goal is. If it's endurance, it's lightweight, lots of repetitions. If it's strength, it's heavier weight with fewer repetitions. We don't care if it's with machines, with free weights or what. And the intensity, 60 to 90% for strength and 40 to 60% for endurance. A lot more repetitions for endurance than for strength. The frequency, at least 2 days a week. The repetitions, it depends on whether or not you're going for strength or endurance. And if you're going to go for sets, you use sets, remember that if you do have more repetitions, in other words, lighter weight, you're going to do fewer sets. If you have heavier weight with fewer repetitions, you'll do more sets. And I'll show you how that works here. Here's an example. This is the strength training program that I developed for our employees out here at JSC. And I've only put, I think, 11 stations there because I just didn't have enough room on my slide to put all 18. I don't think you'd be able to see them, but this is just an example. That's me. That's a 65-year-old codger. I'm 66 now, so I guess this isn't a year old. 155 pounds, and I was strength tested on the leg extension and the chest press. And I've got a little test where I don't really have to go to all out throw up. What I do is just tell the guy to lift. What we do is you figure out his body weight, and we use something a little bit less than that, and see how many times he can do his leg extension test. And if it's at least anywhere between 10 and 15 is what we're looking for. It can be actually even less than that. And I can estimate the 1 repetition max with that. And then from that, I can calculate or estimate how much weight to put on all the rest of those machines. And then I did the same thing for the chest press. From the chest press, I can calculate the amount of weight to put on the arm machines. So for a beginner, I start him out at 60% of his max. So that 60% line shows that this guy would put 160 pounds on the leg press, 115 pounds on leg extension, 70 pounds on leg curl, and so forth, all the way down the line. That's his 60% weight. Now, if he's using 60%, he's going to do a lot of repetitions. All right, so the repetitions are 12 to 14. If he's using 70%, he does a few less repetitions, 9 to 11 repetitions. For sets, if he does a lot of stations, and this guy's doing 18 stations, you can't do multiple sets with 18 stations. You wouldn't get out of the room alive. It's just too many. But if you do fewer stations, then you can do multiple sets. A lot of athletes do multiple sets. So if you're doing 60%, it's 2 to 3 sets. 70%, 3 to 4 sets. 80%, 4 to 5 sets. More sets because there's fewer repetitions. So the total volume is still about the same. And then days per week, we find you should never do less than 1. We have seen people actually bulk up, get stronger, and then do a full exhaustion 1 day a week workout and not lose any strength. There's a big difference, though, between doing 1 day a week and none. Now, to gain strength, you're going to have to do more than 1 day a week. You get better fitness for twice a week, much better than compared to 1, and certainly better than none, and not a lot better for 3 days a week as compared to 2. So we generally recommend twice a week is plenty. For progression, we usually say after about a month, you should be ready to go from 60 to 70% and so forth. And I tell people after 6 to 12 weeks, it's kind of up to you. Come back and see me. I'll give you another test and I'll give you another program. And this is just kind of a general strategy. This guy's combining his aerobic training with his strength training. So 4 days a week, he's using the stationary bike. He's got a varied program, a kind of a modest, heavy, and light workout for the stationary bike. And then twice a week, he does 30 minutes, that's Tuesday and Thursday, on the machines, on strength machines. Now, some people say, well, I can't go over there 5-6 days a week. That's too much time. I just don't have it. And I say, well, then do both of them as long as you're here, because I don't know when you're going to come back. They say, can I do both strength and aerobic training on the same day? And the answer is yes. And let me explain something about that. The textbooks are going to tell you that you should do your aerobic training first and follow that with the strength training rather than strength training first. The reason is it gives you some warm-up, it enhances blood circulation, raises body temperature, some and so forth. But the reality is anybody who's done this knows this. If I get on that treadmill for 30 minutes and get off, I am sweating like a pig. And I start getting on those machines, and after a couple of them, I'm sliming all over the place. I'm getting cold and uncomfortable, and after 4 or 5 stations, I quit and leave. And I talk to everybody. Everybody does that. Now, the reason we tell them don't lift first is if you lift weights first and then try to get on the treadmill, your muscles are perfused. Ever notice you feel really bulked up and cool after you've been lifting for a while? Well, then that kind of goes away. That's because all that fluid that provides nourishment to the muscles is stuffed in between the cells. It's called perfusion. It's giving it nourishment, oxygen and glucose and so forth for muscle contraction. But then it's recirculated. It's milked back through the veins after 5 minutes or so, and it's recirculated. So what I tell the people to do, if you're going to do both on one day, do the lift first. Lift weights first. And then get on the treadmill or the stationary bike, whatever you're going to do, and expect the first 5 minutes to be a hard warm-up. So just take it easy the first 5 minutes. It's not going to kill you. You're going to recirculate the blood, and then you're going to find after a while things begin to get better and you can recirculate and engage in more vigorous exercise after a little warm-up. Now, here's bad news. If you stop training, you lose the muscle. I think most of us know this, that you're going to gain strength, and you can gain strength pretty fast. We've seen significant increase in strength in 12 weeks. I mean, some significant gain in strength and in size. If, for example, you gain we've seen like a 25% increase in muscle strength and arm strength in 12 weeks. If you stop exercising, stop lifting, and you just don't do any weightlifting at all, 12 weeks later, you're going to have the same loss as you gained. You're going to have a 25% loss in strength and loss in reduction in size. It doesn't mean you go back to zero. It means you go back to wherever it was you started. So the detraining effect tends to be equal to the gain of the training effect. The equal in time. We're pretty close. Now, folks always ask me, what should I eat if I'm going to be doing a lot of heavy weightlifting? The diet isn't a whole lot different for an athlete as compared to a non-athlete. There's a few differences, but the difference isn't huge. All of us need around 25-30% of our total calories, 25-30% from fat, around 15% from protein, and the rest from carbohydrate. 60-70% from carbohydrate. Most of it should be from carbohydrate. I'm not talking about donuts and sugars, though. I am talking about vegetables and things like that. They are carbohydrates. Before working out, if you know you're going to have a heavy workout, 1 to 3 hours prior to the workout, you ought to have a meal. And I recommend a liquid meal because it's a whole lot easier to digest it. Don't go in there with a full stomach and then throw up all over the weight room. And you need to get plenty of carbohydrate. So the ratio is about 4 to 1, carbohydrate to protein. You do need some protein. There's a kind of a myth that bodybuilders and weightlifters need a lot more protein. But I'm going to say a little bit about that in just a minute. You need some, but you definitely need carbohydrate for the energy. Protein requirement for somebody engaged in heavy weightlifting is about twice as great as for somebody who's not. So somebody who's not engaged in weightlifting needs about roughly a half a gram of protein per pound body weight. Somebody going through heavy strength training needs about 8/10, maybe 9/10 a gram per pound body weight. But remember this. Somebody not going through heavy weightlifting doesn't need as many total calories. A 170-pound guy who's not going through weightlifting needs 1,800 to 2,000 calories a day to keep from getting fat. He's not going through any exercise. If he's in heavy weightlifting, now he probably needs 2,500 calories. He needs a lot more calories. And he also needs more protein, but the total of the percent of the total still doesn't exceed 20%. It's not 40% as many bodybuilding coaches and trainers have tried to get our athletes to do, giving them protein shakes and all these other crazy things, which really overloads them on protein. There's a real problem with excessive protein. The average athlete eats 88% above what they recommend, what we really need. For one thing, it's very expensive. I don't know if any of you guys ever bought these protein shakes, but they're $5 to $7 a shake. They're very expensive, and they're crazy. And they lead to dehydration. There tends to be a loss in calcium. High protein diets tend to be associated with high fat. We've found when I train little high school kids, we tell them after you're through, go drink a glass of milk. If you don't like a glass of milk, put some Carnation Instant Breakfast in it. It makes it taste good. You get all the protein you need. You get some carbohydrate in there. It's tasty, and you'll drink it. And we find the same effect as you'd getting with one of those expensive amino acid shakes. It's really important, though, with timing. You should get a meal within 30 minutes to an hour right after the workout, especially if it's a heavy workout. If you have your athletes or you yourself are exercising really hard, within 30 minutes to an hour, you need to get something. It doesn't have to be a lot. A good large glass of milk is usually about all you need, 300 to 400 calories. So, here's my summary. And that is, we do see a decrease in fitness and in performance with age, but most of that is due to the fact that we become inactive and gain weight. The aging should not cause us to lose our functional independence, and it should not cause us to become obese. There is an aging effect, but it shouldn't be so great that we can't still get around when we're old. So resistance training has been found to be appropriate for older people. We're not going to hurt them, and they do get the same training effect as young people do. And they follow the same guidelines. Just we tend to be a little bit more sensitive because often fatal diseases are more common in the older folks. We follow general training principles of overload, progression, specificity, reversibility, and follow a good nutrition plan to include an adequate mix of carbohydrate, protein, and fat. It's important that you eat adequate calories, and timing is important. It's important that you get something right after the heavy workout. And that about concludes my presentation, so I'll throw it open for questions. Do any of you have any questions? And I hope you do, because if you don't, I'm going to take my shirt off. I'm wondering if anybody's listening. Nobody.
I've got a question, Larry. This is Scott Dennis.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of younger than military people, and our demographics have changed out here. We do have more younger military people who want a lot more functional training, and they, with the proliferation of the internet and all the different programs on the internet, you see CrossFit and PX90, and I sometimes get aggravated reading some of the workouts they put on there because I don't see any real progression or training frequency. The old, SAID principles, specific adaptations to imposed demands. But a lot of these people want some of those programs, and I think they do enjoy the challenge and the intensity of it, but I do see a lot of our younger people getting hurt because they're not really ready to get into some of these programs, and they put themselves in positions and intensity loads that are not appropriate. Do y'all see that same thing at your facilities?
I'm glad you mentioned that because that has really got